Yo, what's up, guys? Editing Chrono here. How many times am I going to start one of these interviews with one of these cut-ins of an edit? But anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and mention a few things really quick before we get started with this interview. Um, First and foremost, the clips that are going to be shown during the interview itself, a lot of them come from Kasumi's direct channel. I highly recommend checking those clips out directly because some of them do have context or have dialogue and things like that that aren't going to be shown in this video. It's just for the purpose of giving you guys something to look at if you're just watching the video itself. I highly recommend jumping over to their channel and actually watching those videos because it provides a lot of awesome context for Ranger that you may yourself not understand or know. That's something that I learned while looking through these clips and videos because I didn't know that that was the case when I grabbed them for the video. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. You guys enjoy the video. Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Chrono here, and welcome back to the channel. So today will be the next in line in our class interviews, and today's episode will be covering Ranger. Now, in case this is the first of these videos you have seen, since we'll be doing interviews with top end or high end players that have pushed their class to the absolute limit of every class slash weapon in the game. Some will be classes, some will be individual weapons, depending upon how they interact with their classes, but we're going to try to cover the entire spectrum of the entire game itself. The point of these is to help pull back the veil on some of the common misconceptions about individual classes, and at the same time, maybe educate myself and some of you guys out there on what these classes are actually capable of and what they're struggling on. So today's episode, we've got Kasumi here with us. So give me just a moment. I will be bringing them on and I'll let them introduce themselves. One moment. All right, so here we are with Kasumi. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, feel free.
Hey everyone, what's up? My name is Kasumi. I've been playing Ranger at the top level for about a year now, soloing content as it comes out, and I'm the one providing gameplay clips and insight as far as the Ranger guide goes. Not much written by me because I can't spell, to be completely honest.
Join the
But
club.
yeah, I actually did not play Ranger in base. I was a Dirty Luster player. So sorry to all of you
Can't really
who know my
blame you.
class.
Lester was kind of busted, though,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
fun. Like it wasn't even like it was just busted. It was busted and fun. So it's fair. I
yeah.
feel like
No,
we all kind of played it a bit.
but yeah, I really enjoyed it, but I actually swapped to Ranger just because my alliance needed a Ranger, and I kind of fell in love with the class at first sight. So at this point, I mean, I've been soloing content like purples. I've been doing arcs records. I'm normally the one behind the really weird innovations that come out of classes. So like
Hmm.
the encore jump staff strat in Solus, that's something that I just found out of nowhere where I was like, how can I fit in more damage?
Hmm.
But aside from that, I've just been enjoying the class, and I'm just a guy that enjoys Ranger.
Awesome, awesome. So you've funny enough, I think you're the first person I've interviewed that hasn't just been like a career of that class the entire time.
Yeah.
Helvian has played Gunner the entire way. Nep is basically married to Jet Boots, which you guys will get that interview before this one will go live. But yeah, Nep is basically married to Jet Boots ever since he started playing the game back in JP. You're the first one who's been like, yeah, I played something else and then moved over to Ranger. So it's good to hear
Yeah.
we're getting more Rangers. Rangers are always, at least for me, I'm happy to see a Ranger because I get to see my big number get bigger. So
Always.
it's always
As
a
we
plus
hear.
on my end. But yeah, let's go ahead and just jump directly into this. We have quite a bit to talk about today. So I feel like these all feel a little bit different with everyone. So feel
Mhm.
free to kind of just do this in more of like an open fashion. But we're gonna go into just a list of things that we have here today. We're gonna start off with like class strengths. So what what does a ranger do well? Like what do you feel like when you show up, you can kind of do better than anyone else, or just like it you do this thing really, really well as everyone else, if not substantially better.
Well, I think the thing that everyone's going to think of immediately is Blight.
Of
Ranger's the only
course.
class that can shoot Blight. So that's just we're always needed, with except for the extremely niche opportunities such as like Blazing Battle for the Arcs record. But
Hmm.
the class has an extremely lenient counter, very beginner friendly. I think the class itself is very easy to pick up, but I also think that the class itself is always wanted. It's always useful. It's very easy to find parties. Oftentimes, when there's a 3 out of 4 or 7 out of 8, people are saying, do we have a ranger? Is there a ranger in the UQ? Because a ranger just makes everyone's lives easier. The DPS that Ranger provides is also extremely good when fighting large bosses. So, MDFA, Soulless, any of the Dark Falls variants, to be honest.
Right, right. Yeah. I have definitely found myself looking for a ranger in most cases, even in my own alliance. Um my one of our members, MKP, plays, bouncer and gunner, but like he also plays ranger, so it almost feels like the bard of the situation in a lot of cases in other
Right.
MMOs where it's like, hey, you play this and you play this, but can you also play bard? Cool, play that. So that's definitely something that people do look out for. So that's pretty awesome. Was there anything else that outside of those specific things that just feels like ranger just kind of shoots ahead of the rest when it comes to?
I think the biggest thing with Ranger, as far as strengths go,
Hmm.
is I think the counter is just ridiculous. I think the mines and the counter opportunities you can provide, then invulnerability that you get with them, is one of the things that kind of makes Rangers shine, and that really long, lenient counter does help with that. So, there's just something really satisfying about laying a mine on something like MDFA and then just seeing a crit for like 20,000 or something like that. But aside from that, I guess my main things would just be blight rounds, the fact that it's always wanted, the counter is very lenient, and it's really not hard to find parties. It's just something that's very easy to pick up, and I think the class is very enjoyable.
Hey, you heard it here first, guys. If you want to get a party, be a ranger. It's that simple.
Yeah,
So to kind of go on the opposite end of things, and by the way, I didn't know mine crits were so insane.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, I
They're
see things like pinion crit for, I think my most recent new like highest crit I've seen on pinion on just like regular content without like super
mhm.
gouging stuff or anything weird. I think it's like 185k.
Oh my gosh.
But I stand in place forever to
Yeah.
do it, so it's pretty awful. But yeah, 20k seems pretty awesome. But yeah, like I said, to flip things on our head a little bit, let's look at the opposite end. So now that we talked about strengths, what are some weaknesses that you find when you play ranger? Something like that just generally just does not feel great when you're a ranger.
The amount of times I have died in some random animation while I'm trying to do something is extraordinarily high. I think in comparison to other classes and how they play, Ranger can be a little bit on the slower side,
Hmm.
but I think the animation locks are the biggest thing. If I try to cast Fallen Impact, for example, and the boss does, a huge swing, but
Hmm.
I'm still in that cast, I'm going to get hit 10 out of 10
Hmm.
times because you can't cancel out a fallen after you've already launched the volley of rockets. Launcher as itself is not it cannot be a solo weapon. I'm sorry for all of you launcher mains out there.
All
But
right,
as far
so
as as far
we're
as
gonna we're gonna
DPS,
we're gonna interrupt it just for really quick in this one. It might have been a conversation with someone I had that tried to tell me how launcher invalidates every melee weapon in the game that even
yeah,
sparked the idea for these interviews in the first place. So
I
um
yeah,
listen closely. Those who believe that launcher is so invalidating for everything. This is not me
I
saying this, by the way.
yeah, I'm sorry to that individual, truly. But I know there are some absolute freaks of nature. Kat, shout out to her. She did the dual quest clear on Havaldi with
Mhm,
launcher, but half of that was dive attacks and step counters and really perfect scenarios. But in terms of I'm going to go into this boss solo or I'm going to go into this boss with a party and just use launcher, I don't mean to be mean, but it's kind of like an active grief thing because rifle is just so much stronger than launcher and launcher's current state.
mhm,
I think another weakness is that the class itself is extremely micro heavy. So, for example, if Solus has his arm open up, right,
mhm,
and the bullet is purple on it, knowing the break timings of that part is crucial to maintain that purple bullet because in NGS, when a part breaks and the bullet is purple and it's still on the part, when you switch it to another part, it actually turns red and the counter resets.
hmm.
Now, in party play, I don't think it's as big of a deal as it is in solo, but when you're in solo, you're losing that 5% damage and you have to manually build that up and, ensure that your stocks are in change.
That's
I
interesting.
think
Never knew that one actually.
Yeah, I think that that alone kind of makes the class ceiling really high in
Hmm.
terms of, just micro optimizations that you have to perform to ensure that your bullet stays purple. And it's not even just for you. If you're doing party speed runs and you have four slayers and two bouncers, you and then a techer, for example, but
Hmm.
then one of those slayers swaps out for a hunter, you have to kind of think in your head, okay, how is the down timing for this boss going to change to where I can make sure that the bullet transfer is going to stay purple. I had a lot of struggles with that on Zelfetto, the robot,
Hmm.
where we would sometimes change class comps or defeat amps on the bouncer tree. And I would then have to think, okay, if we subtracted this from this part of the skill tree, this down should have like it would maybe happen 5 seconds later as opposed to 4 seconds later. So I got to make sure that I have an extra stock for that. So those micro optimizations really kind of skyrockets the class ceiling, and it also makes for some very frustrating moments because you might shoot a bullet and it might be your last stock, and then the part breaks and then you don't have anything for 10 seconds. So I think there's a lot that goes into it, but the animation locks and the class ceiling, the class skill ceiling, both pretty big weaknesses.
Yeah. And to give a little bit of context, so two major things actually in this. One, because this is a very common thing that tends to rile people up. By the way, when we talk about a weapon not being super great or maybe a grief or bad, no one is saying you're bad at using that weapon. What they're saying is the amount of effort you put in to get a good response or a good value out of that weapon far exceeds what someone could do with another weapon with a lot less effort in getting the same sort of
100%.
result. So a lot of times you'll see people that'll be like, "Oh, well, I do really well with this weapon." And the thing I like to tell people is stop giving credit to the weapon. That is you as the player, not the weapon.
Right.
People that are clearing content with things like, and I know I'm going to agree for this, for Talus, for Launcher, like people that are clearing content with these weapons. I think Talus is better now, apparently, with the new stuff that got released. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know yet. I haven't looked that far into it. But like at least before we had the tech customizations when people were clearing things with Talus when it really wasn't focused around single target play. It was mostly focused around a lot of AoE and saying, "Hey, look, I'm great because I'm doing this. That's awesome, but that's you. Don't give that to
Right.
the weapon." It's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing you would do with like a fighting game when someone's like, "I play low tier and I kick everyone's butt." Yeah, that's you as the player. That's talented. The
Of
character's not
course.
giving you that win. So just keep that in mind when we talk about these things. It's something that's not insulting the individual person. And then to kind of build on the class skill ceiling and skill floor thing, some people may not understand exactly, but we talk about skill ceilings versus skill floors. It's the amount of effort required to get to get a specific amount of damage out on a class or to get the most out of the class itself. When someone
Mhm.
says something has a very high skill floor, what they essentially mean is that you can pretty much do mostly anything and still get a pretty good response out of it. Even at like its worst, it's still very good. But when you talk about a high skill ceiling, which you might think is great, it means that in some cases, or in a lot of cases, you have to put in a lot of effort to reach that point of it being very good. So that's why like it seems a little weird if you're not familiar with that sort of conversation to say that a high skill ceiling might be a weakness of a class,
Mhm.
but it can be for the general populace for a lot of people.
Right.
But yeah, so talking now about some of its strengths and weaknesses and things about that, we can kind of move on to this is more pointed, but we talked a little bit about this beforehand, but some class matchups.
Mhm.
What sort of content does Ranger like excel in? What does it not do super great in? Where do you want to see a Ranger versus not want to see a Ranger, I guess?
So any big boss that you can get multiple pierces through, like multiple hits on like a certain attack, so like an arm on Solus or the staff or Solus's core or MDFA's claws when he does the stabs. Any boss like that raising shot can pierce through multiple times will always be a good matchup for Ranger because raising pierce is kind of crazy as far as damage is concerned. I
Yeah, I
think
saw that.
yeah, I mean, look, I'm not gonna say anything because I don't want Sega to nerf it, but I think it is in a very good spot as far as strength goes. I think weaknesses,
Hmm.
as far as boss matchups go, there are certain bosses when you're fighting in parties, smaller bosses, like Kelkundo, where the Kelk will be aggroed onto a fighter or Slayer, for example. And as Ranger, you kind of want to be playing in that melee range to fish for mine counters, but it makes it very hard to get consistent mine counters because obviously he's not completely focused on you. So right now, MDFA, despite me saying that it's very good for Ranger in terms of piercing ability, the attacks are actually too fast in intervals for the mines to go off when he does the quick claw stabs.
Hmm.
So that's a weakness in the fight itself. So I think it has its gives and takes, its pros and cons for each individual boss. But I think a
Hmm.
general good rule of thumb would be if it's a big boss that Raising can pierce through multiple times, then
Hmm.
it's probably going to be a good matchup for Ranger. And that's not to say that Ranger does terrible against humanoid sized bosses or bosses that are not giant with multiple hitboxes that you can hit through the arm. I think that any boss can be a good matchup for Ranger because Ranger has the ability to make anything it wants a weak point, so you're automatically getting that damage boost.
Oh yeah.
But I would I would 100% say that bigger bosses are easier for high damage output compared to smaller bosses.
Yeah, it's funny to say that. Mention the raising shot situation again. It's in a good spot. Leave it alone. But I realized how strong it actually was when I saw the Twitter post of I believe it was Wise uh,
Hmm.
soloing DFA or DFS with a Prim rifle. I was like, yeah, those Pierces are pretty baller. So
Yeah,
I see where they're coming from. That's super awesome, and it's nice to see that Ranger has that sort of niche that it can take advantage of. Seeing as most classes, even when you have a lot of skills that like do look like they travel through targets or
hmm,
that are large, maybe hitting multiple spots, what you'll find in most cases for a lot of classes, it doesn't actually hit multiple spots. It just
right.
hits them multiple times, but it's only hitting once per time that's actually going off. So it's very interesting to see that Ranger. I think that does any other class do that? I don't think there's any other class that has that sort of piercing effect, does it?
Not to the extent of raising shot. I know I've rattled some bow players' feathers with
Okay.
the amount of pierce that raising does compared to like some of the PS that bow has.
That's what I
But
was
as
thinking
far
of.
as
Is Bow is the other one?
yeah, but in terms of like just raw piercing ability, I don't think any other
Mhm.
class matches against Ranger in that regard.
That is absolutely wild. But yeah, it's awesome to hear about that. So this one's going to be a little bit off the cuff, I guess, and it kind of made me think about this as we were talking
Hmm.
about some of the matchups and things like that. And feel free if you don't have everything here; it's not a huge deal. Um, can we talk a little bit about what makes launcher not that great of a weapon? Because I know a lot of people hear it and they see clips of people like holding down like or throwing out a mine or and playing like forest or something like that and throwing down like a
Hmm.
laser and just holding it for like ever. I mean, I did that meme way back in the day when Ranger first came out or when NGS first came out. We laughed
Right.
about it.
Hmm.
There were speed run techs of people doing it in
Yeah.
Bujin in the corner in the back corner. I remember my buddy playing Ranger. He was going for speed runs and he just rammed himself up into a corner, little holding launcher or whatever, and you see massive amounts of damage. Some people are
Right.
very confused. So like, where's the problem? I guess with launcher.
So, I mean, I guess I'll go through the individual PAs of launcher and why I feel that it's not that great as a solo weapon if you're just using launcher only and not rifle.
Go for it.
So, starting with its normal attack, the wind up to actually get that normal attack out, regardless of charged or uncharged, the amount of damage you're putting out compared to if you were just using rifle, I feel is rather low. And you're putting yourself in an animation that you can't cancel out of once you're inside of it. As far as like PA's like divine impact goes, so a lot of people actually don't know this, but if you actually cast uncharged or charged divine impact as you get hit by something, you actually don't take damage. It has, I don't know if iframes or guard frames is the right word for it, but you actually just don't take damage if you time it properly. And I believe in the ranger guide that Ivan and I wrote, there's several clips of that, just being able to iframe your way through certain attacks by using divine impact. I
Okay.
think Divine is strong on its own, but the recoil you get back from it, you would run out of PP very fast, just constantly spamming Divine Impact. Fallen Impact is one of those PAs that we actually got a craftable version for. So there's 3 variants.
Mhm.
And I think most people have elected to either go for the first variant, which actually improves the cast time. So that actually kind of alleviates some of the issues that we had with Fallen Impact. But those issues that alleviates with Fallen Impact are then used in scenarios where you would previously not be able to fit Fallen Impact in because you were also using rifle PAs as well.
Mm.
So almost everything that launcher does is in support of something that you were already doing with rifle. So if I'm gonna keep using Solus as an example here.
A good one.
If I am shooting a piercing raising through Solus's arm and he puts the laser on my head, the one that follows you around,
Mhm.
I know that the amount of time I would have between casting that fallen impact with the type 1, I would have a little more leniency in not getting hit in regards to, that casting going off and being able to transition into a rifle dodge. I would say this, not the only, the saving grace for launcher is the launcher reinforce. But the issue is that launcher reinforce is not active 24/7. I believe it actually has a 30-second cooldown at the beginning of like each quest, and then
Mhm.
after you use it, then it has a 90-second cooldown. If I got that wrong, obviously you can correct me in the comments. So sorry about that.
No
But
worries.
um, but in regards to launcher reinforce, the step counter, very good, and launcher reinforce actually out damages revolt aim, I believe, in active, so long as you can complete the first 3 normal steps. But you're comparing those 30 seconds you get of launcher reinforce to an entire quest's worth of damage that you could also do with rifle. The damage just wouldn't stack up. You have these attacks that last very long, to the point where you can't fit a second variation of that attack in. So then you have to resort to things like using dive kicks as substitution damage. Where with rifle, you could either shoot a raising and cancel out of it, or you could weapon action dodge. There's just a lot of things with launcher that kind of don't promote the use of using it as a main weapon, and that's kind of evident with Fear Racer now, at least in comparison to Rifle. So Rifle has gotten a lot of buffs, as I'm sure we all know, and obviously some people are saying a lot of those buffs were unwarranted. It might, impact the skill floor, the skill ceiling. I get it, but when we look at Rifle Grenadier and being able to refresh mines every time you dodge, when you compare that to something like Fear Racer, where it's like, okay, I jump up, I throw a launcher sticky, and then I just hold down this button the entire time, the amount of
Mhm.
damage you're losing compared to just countering with rifle is disgustingly large. It's actually ridiculous. So I think that while yes, there are players that I'm sure that are out there that are freaks of nature with launcher and they've been doing launcher only, but
Mhm.
I personally was a rifle only player in Avaris,
Mhm.
and I was able to clear those purples no issue with rifle only. I tried to go in using launcher only, and I think it took me over 6 minutes to kill the first boss. Like, just like, because the
That's
thing
pain.
is, yeah, the step counter for launcher, if you
Mhm.
didn't know as well, it's not it doesn't track flying enemies well at all. So if an
Hmm.
enemy is high above your head and you launch your step counter and attack it throws, the bullet only arcs so high, so a lot of times it just doesn't even hit the enemy that you're aiming at.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
you put yourself in a lot of situations where the boss moves, or they raise their hands, or they do anything that slightly inconveniences you, and you're either locked into an animation or your attack just straight up misses. There are so many bosses in this game that can very easily just step slightly to the right or left of you, and then your fallen impact hits for no damage.
Oh.
Rifle is just a lot better tracking compared to launcher,
Mhm.
as it should. But I guess that's a long-winded answer of why I feel that launcher, although is a good supporting weapon, is just not nearly as viable as rifle in regards to being a main weapon for individuals out there.
I mean, yeah, and longwood is totally fine because, like I said, that's a lot of things I really didn't know that happened with. I knew launcher was despair because it's one of those things that you just pick up when you have ranger friends.
Yeah,
That like it's just certain things just don't work the way they're supposed to, and sometimes you just hear enough through grunts to know something went wrong.
yeah. And I
So
mean, what, uh,
yeah, no good.
I there's the amount of launcher PBs I've missed as well.
Oh god.
Ridiculous. Like there are so many. I have at least 10 plus clips of me shooting my launcher PB into the stratosphere because it's a tiny ball that shoots out of your launcher, and the boss can just slightly move, and then it's gone. There's just nothing you can do about it. So,
And
although launcher PB is obviously very strong, but moments like that, it's like, come on, dude, like really?
exactly. Like, and you can make the argument of skill issue. I hear you guys. That's totally fine. But also
Yes,
think we're playing the game where there are weapons in game right now that can press PB and it's just damage in a circle around them that does almost as much damage. So when you compare the two, it's kind of ridiculous.
and
Um,
like I acknowledge the skill issue. Look, anyone who's a skill issue, I will send you all the clips of me missing launcher PBs. I personally will dig them up and go find them for you. I think launcher is a great weapon as a support weapon, but in terms of a main weapon, I just can't endorse people using it as a main weapon when it just performs 10 times better as that support.
Gotcha. Now, I am curious. So as someone who plays a ton of bouncers, played a ton of bouncer, I've gone from living, I mean, even back in base game, living life as solo soaring blades to feeling like you needed to have jet boots to being able to play solo soaring blades again. It was totally fine. To NGS, where it was just soaring blades and it was a throw to use another type of weapon,
Right.
to it was a throw if you didn't have a jet boot with you, to now where it's kind of up in the air, where it sort of is and sort of isn't depending upon how you're playing. What's the
Right.
relationship between rifle and launcher? Like, say I was a guy that wanted to like I loved launcher and I wanted to primarily use launcher. Like,
Mhm.
realistically, how much is rifle covering me in most cases to play optimally?
I would say it's like a 85-15 in favor
Whew,
of rifle playing optimally
sick.
because when I look at any of my old videos, the times when I'm using launcher, and this varies by boss fight. So if I use I'm forgetting his name, like the Wukong monkey from Stia
Uh,
Portals.
Goku, yeah,
Yes,
Goku.
and Goku. So when I look at him, I use launcher for half the fight because I would shoot him with raising shot with my rifle, and
Hmm.
then I would shoot a fallen impact after a counter, and I would just repeat that process over and over again.
Hmm.
And you can get really creative with how much you use launcher in that fight. But there are other fights that simply don't permit you to use launcher nearly as much simply because the amount of animation that launcher takes to do certain attacks doesn't really like those opportunities don't really present itself. So if I use the current Dark Falls, the Malignant Aegis,
Hmm.
when he does the claw stabs that are very fast, like the first claw stab, the second claw stab, then he throws like the train car around. On
Hmm.
those stabs, you can actually use launcher to divine impact because throwing the grenade, I believe, is actually less damage than using a charged divine impact on there. So there's an example of where you can use it. But if you try to cast a fallen impact on him, his head might block it. So then you run into that issue.
Hmm.
Or if you try to cast a fallen impact before the stab comes in, you might hit one shell out of 8 that you have. So I believe that there are definitely opportunities to put lots of damage in with launcher, but I think the main thing that it comes down to is how well you play with rifle and how well you optimize with rifle and then introduce launcher into the fray of that. So when I look to optimize any type of quests, I will go in with rifle and I will try to optimize it to its limit with rifle, and then I will slowly try to add in various aspects of launcher that would then help me squeeze out that tiny bit of more damage where otherwise I wouldn't have been able to with rifle. So whether that's okay, I'm going to counter this and then cast fallen impact and then shoot a raising and then counter again, things like that are better than just shooting like one more raising, because you're having multiple sources of damage. You have your launcher sticky. Using that is its own type of skill expression,
Mm-hmm.
where the launcher sticky, the more launcher hits you have on that sticky grenade, the more damage it actually does. So if you can put in, I believe it's 10 hits to the launcher sticky, then you'll be doing max damage with the sticky compared to as if you put 0 in. So if I throw a sticky, I'm going to try to cast Fallen Impact or use some type of launcher PA to get that max damage range. And this can be seen in several Souls videos of Whis or Ivu or Addy, where you will see them jump up to weak bolt the hand, and everyone's strat kind of differs in regards
Mm-hmm.
to Ranger. But you could shoot the hand, you can use multi launch to get about 6 or 7 hits in, and then you could use Divine Impact to get your 8th hit in, and then you're already almost at that max damage. But the thing is that these are all in relation to, okay, how do I squeeze out just a tiny bit more damage right here
Mm-hmm.
compared to using rifle, where it's like I am actively always doing damage. When you have rifle and launcher multi, you are almost never going for launcher step counter, even with reinforce active, unless there's a window in which you just laid a mine and you will not be able to lay another mine, and it's easier to launch a reinforced counter there.
Mm. I see.
So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
It's it's pretty in depth because, like, I mean, realistically speaking, sometimes when you hear the way certain players talk about launcher, it's almost like it never gets used. But I
Hmm.
also I kind of, like, in the back of my mind, I always thought, it has to, as often as I've seen, mines get thrown in fights, or as often as I see people multi-weaponing their rifle with launcher. If launcher never gets used,
Hmm.
there'd be no reason for the multi-weapon. No
Right.
one's spending 30 or what, 20 or 30 mil or whatever, how much the launchers cost right now for flugels, to buy that weapon to multi-weapon if it's not getting used.
Right. Of course.
So yeah, for sure, had to have some sort of benefit in that situation. So it's cool to hear that there's something there, but it
Hmm.
is it is tough. Would you say that, like, launcher might suffer from a situation of, like, and we mentioned this in previous interviews, the effect that is Counter-Star Online, where sometimes bosses are just a little too fast, and
Yeah.
a little too spastic to really get the full benefit of certain weapons.
I think launcher does suffer with that quite a lot.
Mm,
Where okay, like X boss is too fast, so my
mhm.
fallen impact that I just shot on the ground in front of my face is now null and void because the boss moved. Like
I see.
Calcundo is a prime example of that, where
I hate Calcuno so
like
much.
like
I hate
and
that boss, dude.
I'm sure like even like and any class would know that there are times where Calcuno will be in your face and then he'll just randomly like moonwalk 30 steps backwards
Or just
across the
sideways out of
map.
nowhere.
Yeah, and it's just like any attack that I plan on. I've missed so many PBs on Kelp because of that, by the way.
So awful.
Um, but like moments like that where launcher kind of suffers in regards to that. I
Hmm.
think with bosses that kind of have more static moves, more predictable moves, it makes
Hmm.
launcher a lot easier. So like in Alio and Redum, you knew bosses weren't going to be moving around like a ton.
Hmm.
So it made pre-firing Fallen Impact or using Fear Eraser a lot easier, especially in like solos and party runs. Like I think if you actually go back to the Redum clears, you can actually see people like wall jumping off the wall, throwing a sticky at Dino, and then just
Hmm.
using Fear Eraser the entire time. And I do think that has a lot of use in that point of time. But now we're in an area where launch or rifle is so good at doing things that launcher was previously the use for. So it's like you kind of have to pick and choose where it's like, is it really worth using launcher over learning how to do this specific thing?
Hmm.
Or do I just stick to what I know? So like and bosses like the mage bird from Stia, I don't even know what his name. I don't even remember what his name
I
is,
don't.
honestly.
I know what you're talking about, like the mage chicken thing. I don't
Yeah,
remember its name at all.
yeah,
Um.
it's the second boss in Stia Purple. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
there are things that you can do with launcher in that quest or in on that boss that most people really wouldn't think about unless they truly tried to like experiment with launcher. And I think that's where those launcher mains kind of come into play because if you're using launcher as a main weapon, then you have no choice but to search for how you can do damage that
Hmm.
can even be remotely comparable to rifle. So like for you launcher mains out there, for however many of you there are,
All
if
three. Yep.
you
I'm just
all
joking.
three,
I didn't mean to
if
catch a shit in there. You guys are good. No worries.
yeah, but like if you can actually encore jump on the mage's wings so that you end up behind her each time, and you can cast the fallen impact every time you do that because
Hmm.
she'll repeatedly turn around. But here's the other problem: the minute you cast that fallen impact, and Raylan or not Raylan, I don't know her name. I'm gonna call her mage.
Yeah, I
The
don't remember her
mage,
name at all.
the after the mage turns around and does a different attack, you either have to divine impact iframe or you have to step counter. Divine impact will put you further away from the boss, making it harder to hit your next counter. And if you step counter, then you end up on the floor again and you have to reset your position. With rifle, you can just weapon action counter, get your mine off, encore jump to the other side, and repeat that process till the wings break. This kind of solidifies my stance on why I believe that launcher above all else is a support weapon. And like Chrono said, it's not that you are it's not me saying that launcher itself is bad. I think it's clunky. I think it has its animation locks. But if you are out there and you are honing yourself to the limit with that launcher, good for you. I think it is impressive, but I cannot, like I said, I cannot endorse it. And I'm pretty sure that all the other top rangers would kill me if I told you to go out there and main launcher. So I'm telling you actively, please don't do that. But yeah, that's my stance on it.
And to be fair, and I think Kasumi also shares the same sort of mindset, and I know I have this, and a lot of other players that talk about weapons in this critical state, we want better for you. No one wants you to have a weapon that realistically, and well, actually, that might lead into another question here. Actually, so
Yeah, yeah,
let's kind of table that a little bit for a second here. So
mhm.
let's talk about that because that's one thing that did come up in base PSO2, and this is something that not a lot of players really knew about because they maybe weren't playing back then or didn't follow JP as close back and things like that. Back when PSO2 was around, there was a mindset that you played a class and all of the weapons kind of intertwined with each other. You used
Right.
everything, and a
Hmm.
lot of this was brought about because of certain bosses that existed in base PSO2. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head. But there was a boss in episode 3, I believe, that would quite literally resist your weapons if you did too
Hmm.
much damage to the specific weapon type.
Right.
So it very heavily incentivized the use of other weapons in your class. It's why things like Gunblade had to exist for everyone. And then Luster threw that out the window by just not having to deal with that mechanic at all. They just had a skill where it's like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, because that's fair. But anyway,
Whoops.
besides the point. But it's just that it had a mindset of every weapon had to have use, right? So it
Right.
was very common for a lot of players to use more than just one weapon. Or if you only use one weapon, you felt like you're almost playing with one arm tied behind your back.
Right.
Until episode 5-ish, going in episode 6, where a lot of players felt kind of slighted that, they felt like they had to use every weapon. And Sega made a statement that they wanted to buff weapons so that every weapon could stand on its own feasibly. Now,
Hmm.
that was back in base PSO2. Moving into NGS, we have things like the multi-weapon system, which that could be an entire video on its own. It has been before.
Right.
We have, classes getting certain buffs. We have the fact that Bouncer and Braver can use two different main stats and affects both of their weapons. Um, really leaning back into that using your entire kit sort of thing. How do you personally feel classes should be balanced in that sort of way? Do you feel like every weapon should be able to stand on its own regardless and not have to be able to use another weapon? Or do you feel like each class should realistically have both of their weapons or all of their weapons kind of tied into what they're doing?
I think that I think the game, NGS specifically, should allow those weapons to be viable as solo
Hmm.
weapons. Now, as far as how they do that, I'm not a balance dev. I cannot say for myself like how I personally think they should change it.
Hmm.
But I think the thing with launcher, is that if you and you would have to be kind of careful with this because if you remove all the animations with launcher, then it kind of removes the identity of that weapon. Where launcher was supposed to be like this hard hitting, you have to set up this attack weapon, but I don't think it actually hits all that hard in like in regards to
Right.
you know I don't think it hits all that hard compared to rifle. It's more nimble counterpart. So I think that if you're going to have these things with launcher that give you these animation locks or make it so that people can just go rifle only and completely forget about the launcher weapon as a whole, I do think some numbers need to be tweaked on launcher to kind of make it competitive and to be a standalone weapon. And I think that's
Hmm.
kind of just what it needs. I'm not necessarily advocating for all animations to be removed from launcher because I think that would just kind of make it look really goofy. But I wouldn't mind like launcher reinforce to be the base attack speed of launcher, for
Okay.
example. Like I don't think that would necessarily fix the class, but I do think that it would introduce a lot of new interesting rotations into the current gameplay loop that we have right now. I think the craftable versions of the PAs is definitely a good start. I've already seen people fit in, fallen impacts where I previously didn't think would be possible because you have that faster animation cast time.
Hmm.
But I think that the bottom line is that if a class has two weapons, those two weapons should be usable. I don't think that I should be able to completely ignore one weapon that, seems that that is the identity of the class. And obviously this other point could be a whole video on its own, but I think that Ranger's kind of in an identity crisis right now because we're playing in fighter range. The whole Ranger
Hmm.
aspect of it. Like you're not really playing at range. You're kind of playing with that Counterstar Online 2 mindset.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that with rifle and launcher, both weapons should be viable in their own right. I shouldn't just be able to look at like if I look at bouncer for
Hmm.
example, I could see like I see people clearing content with boots and I see people clearing content with soaring blades. And I think that's amazing. I think it's really cool to see all the different optimizations that people make with the weapon. But I think that launcher by itself is so abysmally bad compared to rifle
Hmm.
that it needs to be tweaked in some type of way to enable or to encourage people to actually use it over other subclass weapons because this was a problem in Alien, it was a problem in Redum. If you saw all the ARCS records where people would be Ranger, but then they would sub Braver and
Oh yeah.
multi a katana onto their weapon, and then they'd be first because weak bullet with katana.
Hmm.
I think there should be a reason that you, or I think, yeah, I think there should be a reason that encourages you to multi rifle on the launcher so you have that ability to out DPS those people who are using, like katana rifle or even rifle boots. I dabbled with rifle boots quite a bit actually in Stia
Hmm.
and on and Goku specifically. Like I was putting up similar DPS numbers with rifle boots compared to rifle launcher, and that's a very active launcher fight. So I think the weapon definitely needs some work. I think it needs some tuning, whether that's mixing up the animations a little bit to allow them to be cancelable or making it so that the attacks actually do more damage. I think it just needs something, bottom line. But there I would never say that I should be able to ignore one of the two weapons that my class offers me,
Hmm.
and just be able to go on about my day. And I did that for a while. Full transparency,
Yeah.
I did that. I
I feel like everyone does
completely,
at some point, you know?
yeah, like I completely ignored launcher. I was known as the rifle only guy that just like went ahead and cleared things.
Hmm.
But I think that bottom line, launcher needs some love.
Yeah, so I mean, like it's one thing. I mean, and I've said this beforehand. I fully believe that pinnacle should be use of all your weapons, but use
Yes.
of any one individually should be. I think personally a little more than viable. It should be fairly good.
Yes, I
Like if you
agree.
want to play at the absolute top end, like yeah, use both your weapons to the.
Hmm.
But realistically speaking, it should really only be, in my opinion, anywhere between like a 5 to 10% difference.
Right.
That way you can have that top end play, but you also aren't feeling super punished for just playing the weapon that you like,
Hmm.
which I feel like this should be something that's very forward. So yeah, no, it's cool to think about it from that perspective. So yeah, you shouldn't really ignore any one weapon, but those who know me know that any chance I get to ignore jet boots, it's going to happen. And that's just how that's going to go down. I love my jet boot mains, but I'm leaving you behind. Anyway,
Sorry,
moving
I
on.
can't say the same for you, launcher man. Just
Yeah,
throwing it out there. Like I can't say the same. Like I look, I love all of you, but like secretly I'm gonna be like, look, I need you to like change that habit because you're missing so much potential
I hear
by just
you.
not using rifle, you know? And like this is specifically for ranger. I think with jet boots and soaring blades, like there are like I've seen such crazy gameplay of each of them individually, but as far as launcher goes, like I'm sorry, I can't endorse it, guys.
It's
I can't. Yeah.
it's interesting because I feel like you guys take and it's a much bigger give and take between launcher versus rifle, but like
Mhm.
for a bit of insight, I mean, this is a different conversation, but a bit of insight for bouncer. We take all of the best parts of jet boots and we give jet boots all of our worst parts. Everything that sucks, we just give it right to them and they have to use. So like, you know what? It's one of those things, man. I can see launcher. Hey, you get a grenade. That's super cool. Jet boots, like I'll take, the pocket jolt, the useful PB and all that good stuff. But
Right.
you can have BAPS, dude. I don't want it.
Yeah, you get
It's awful. I'm sorry, but yeah. But moving on. So we kind of went into a bit more class philosophy or balance philosophy there. One thing I am curious about is like how does Ranger stack up damage wise to other classes in the game? Like realistically, if you had to rank, I mean, not even ranking yourself, even if you would think back to like maybe doing speed runs, solo attempts, any runs that
Mhm.
you might do. Now that we actually have a DPS meter, people can see
Right.
like what are things actually capable of? Like what do you see damage numbers wise when you're doing either solos or group runs?
Well, will say for me personally, there have been times where like, wow, I have such high DPS, and then a Slayer's like, I have 9,000, and I'm sitting there with like 6,000. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
that's I feel like that's a consistent thing.
yeah,
Um, I have
um,
people in my chat that are like, dude, you're doing awesome. Like you're putting in so much effort or whatever. And then my Slayer friend is like, dude, I have less gear than you. And yeah, I'm playing at the same level, but it's stupid how much damage I'm doing. And I'm still like 800 ahead of you. I'm like, this is stupid. I don't want to hear that.
yeah.
Leave me alone.
But I think as far as like a general DPS number goes, so for MDFA, I'll just use that as an example. So this is
Hmm.
with Tecker, and this is with a fairly optimized squad. I was putting up numbers around 6,700, 6,800 like a
Okay.
week ago, and I haven't ran it, since then. I think that in terms of like the power rankings for classes, Ranger can definitely compete with I won't say the top dogs like Slayer and Waker. Like I don't think it can compete in any regards to those classes. But I
Hmm.
think that the amount of effort that you put into Ranger, to match the DPS of some of the DPS classes, or the better DPS classes, I should say,
Hmm.
is a lot more than them playing at like an average level. So for me, like I think with Solus, for example, when people were going for solo clears and things of that nature, before we got plus 80, everyone was looking for that general, like I think it was like 5,200 that you needed to clear.
Hmm.
But it was like that 5,200 comes a lot easier for other classes compared to Ranger getting 5,200 because there's just a lot of things you have to like micro optimize where it's like, okay, is my bullet staying purple? Like, am I tracking part breaks? Am I tracking this? Am I tracking that? But I think it's a good contester. It's a good enough contester that while simultaneously buffing the entire party, you yourself are putting up very good damage numbers. I don't think for a second that Ranger is weak. I actually think Ranger is very strong right now in its currency. I don't think it's overpowered, but I do think it's very strong. I think it's strong enough to clear most content solo as it
Hmm.
comes out. There's obviously a lot of optimizations needed for that, but in terms of like if I had to give like a genuine like power ranking, Force you're at the bottom. Sorry.
Yeah, it's rough,
Um,
dude. It's just how it is.
and then from Force, I would say it goes Force, Tekker. Um, I think Ranger can honestly compete with Braver's DPS to an extent.
Mhm,
I think once you get into the realm of like Slayer, Waker, even Fighter, they kind of start to pull away. And
mhm.
Bouncer too, because Bouncer's up there as well.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
I think those four are kind of like just leagues above, like a league above Ranger, and then Ranger's kind of like sitting in a good spot. But I think it should be sitting like around there because at the end of the day, it is supposed to be a support class that enables other classes. So I don't think that our damage should be, you know, crazy high. But I think for an average player, in MDFA, I would say shoot around for about 5,000 DPS, like late 4,000s, early 5,000s. I think DPS is also subjective to a
Mhm.
number of variables. So, like I'll take one of Addy's videos for example. He was like dead on the floor, but then got up, and the weak point was right there. So he shot a bullet on it, and his DPS shot up to like 11,000. And it's
Yep.
like obviously that's a hyperinflated DPS number, but it's very easy to skewer um like those numbers because you're like, oh my gosh, like, this person's doing so much damage when the reality is like that's just an inflated number.
Mhm.
So, with MDFA, the solo clear, people were saying it's about 7,300.
I believe so, yeah,
But
73, 75, I think.
yeah, but the reality is that the last DPS check and the like when he's like the balls are coming in
Mhm,
and the initial DPS check where you just have to like break that ball,
mhm,
those don't contribute to his health at all. So they're just inflationary DPS numbers for you.
mhm.
So I think the actual clear number is like 6,300 or something like that, like
Okay.
after it's all said and done. But I think going in to the final phase, you need like 7,000 something. Um,
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, I actually
but
didn't know that. It's interesting.
but
Um,
yeah,
and it's yeah, that's and one thing to keep in mind too, guys, and the big thing that unfortunately as PSO2 players we don't get to see that in some other games players do get to see a bit more of. Um, those who follow my channel know I'm an avid Final Fantasy 14 player. One thing that you aren't seeing is the amount of damage you're effectively providing everyone else on your team. Um, it's a lot. I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, Ranger provides the most damage buff in the game, like the biggest damage buff in the game. Is it? Am I? I'm almost
yeah,
positive
because
about that. Yeah.
yeah, because what shift? How much is Shifta? Is Shifta 20 or
Shifta
25?
got nerfed when it first came out, so it's
Yeah,
not
I
as
do
strong
remember.
as it was before. But I remember it being Shifta D band is like slight or is a good chunk below what
Yeah,
a purple blight is providing.
yeah, because
Um,
Purple Blight is 25. I hope
mhm.
if I don't get that right, like I'm gonna get so much crap for it.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember like as far as like order of operations or whatever you want to call it, like order of like
Yeah,
actual damage or whatever. Like Ranger provides the most damage between the two. Tector provides just most utility in general because it's damage reduction, as well
right.
as PP recovery. So it's got a lot of utility overall when it
Hmm.
comes to it. And the thing that a lot of people do miss out on, and you guys don't get to see, is yeah, we have a DPS meter now, but you guys don't get to see how much damage you're effectively providing everyone else. Those who
Right.
played PSO2 back in the day on JP and used illegal third-party programs. I was not one of those people. I just, got
Eh,
other people that did use those and to give me the screenshots. It was really cool to see. You would calculations for a skill called Xanverse were also included, which was basically a support skill that Tectors used that provided damage to the entire group. And what you would find very commonly is if you included that damage in with the Tector, they would be the highest DPS in the group
right.
because of how strong it was. And it's something that unfortunately, Rangers don't get to see.
Hmm.
So don't get too discouraged if, like, let's say for example, you're in an MDFA group and like you're doing what 4K, 5K, something in that realm, and you feel like your friends are doing so much more, you're providing them a lot more. So just keep that in mind.
Yep.
Um, so we talked about damage. One thing I did want to go ahead and go over. This one's more. It doesn't have to be exact or an exact science or whatever. But if someone were to come to you and be like, "Hey, look, I'm getting started playing Ranger. Like, what should I keep an eye out for? Like, as far as gearing goes, like, what sort of advice would you give to someone who is at any level of the game, either first starting out or looking to get towards end game? I mean, I would say money be
I
damned, but it's kind
Yeah.
of hard to in those situations because
Yeah.
money is kind of everything in this situation. But just
Mhm.
more so like on different potentials, so on and so forth when it comes to
Yeah.
weapons.
So I guess I'll start off with weapons. So there are four weapons that I would recommend you use. So I guess I'll go from beginner to intermediate to advanced. So
Hmm.
getting a Termina Versh weapon, like a Termina Versh rifle, and I'm saying rifle because I'm telling you actively not to only get a launcher. Um I would say Terminal Verse Rifle. Very easy to understand potential. You're always going to be critting. It's very consistent, so it enables you to kind of understand your progress in a much more linear way. Because if you're doing the same quest over and over again, and you know that you have 100% crit, then your numbers should be very similar or slightly higher or lower depending on how you're playing.
Hmm.
Um, After Verse Medals, I would say the Melic series. I think Melic is just an all around good weapon right now to have, especially if you're not, you know, like you don't have a ton of money to spend on like a Flugel or like a Fixatisa.
Hmm.
This might shock some people, but I would actually say Flugel and then Tisa.
Hmm.
I only say this because while Flugel is objectively better than Tisa, with Tisa, you have to quite literally play close to near perfectly to make the most out of the potential. Because if you didn't know, the Tisa potential on ranged weapons makes it so that every time you get hit, you lose a percentage of damage. So losing any type of percentage of damage actively just means you are doing less DPS. Flugel, you don't have to worry about that. So while Tisas might be more inexpensive, I think that objectively it's just a harder weapon to use because you have to quite literally not get hit. Otherwise, you are losing damage. As far as general just gameplay as you're going through your motions from beginner to intermediate to advanced to expert, things of that nature, the biggest thing I would have to say is don't be too hard on yourself. I think that as anyone, and this goes for all classes, as we rise in the ranks of our classes and as we continue to get better, we kind of are extremely critical of ourselves when we mess up on things that we know we shouldn't mess up on.
Hmm.
So I would say that remember to obviously take breaks with your gameplay. If something's not working, don't just sit there and try to do the same thing over and over again. Try to get creative with it because that is something that I had to learn. I would look at, videos of JP players, other top global rangers, and I would say, like this, what they're doing is not working for me because I play on controller and I felt that them using keyboard and mouse, like I couldn't be as precise with my over the shoulder blights or things of that nature. So I just tried to get more creative with it. I said, okay, what can I do differently that this person isn't doing that would give me similar or more damage? And that's definitely the biggest thing for me. Regardless of what you see as the quote unquote top gameplay, that does not mean that we top players are perfect in the class. I actively encourage you to go test those theories in quests and try different things because you might discover something that we didn't discover. We might have just been going with, whatever we thought was the best, but in reality, you could find something, or anyone can find something regardless of their skill level. An example of this is the Solus staff and encore jump. So when most rangers were electing to use slow fall for PAs, I actually turned PA slow fall off because I realized that there are so many different spots in Solus that I can encore jump and simultaneously do damage, and that eventually led to me. I think I was the first Solus clear
Hmm. That's awesome.
on Global and JP. So yeah, just things like that. I highly recommend just be creative, but also don't be too hard on yourself and understand that getting better takes time regardless of your class. But there are just so many micro optimizations and things that you will learn as you continue playing Ranger that only come with the experience of the class. So, I mean,
Awesome.
good luck.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's always a little harrowing when you see people do some amazing things, right? And you think to
Mhm.
yourself, oh, I'm going to do that. Like that's what works, right? And you try doing that thing and it doesn't really work for you. And the thing to remember is that a lot of times those people try doing that thing for a very, very long time and it didn't work for them. Or
Right.
maybe they found maybe the thing that they're doing is something that they saw someone else do and they couldn't do that thing and they had to find something that worked for them instead. So it's definitely totally fine to watch other players do stuff and try to mimic them, but remember that it's not always going to work the same way for you that it is for someone else. Not to say that it can't, but it doesn't always. So don't get too discouraged when it doesn't work out. So solid advice, absolutely awesome. And remember, when you guys see a video of me doing something super amazing or anyone else doing something super amazing, we probably failed it about 1,000 times before that. You didn't see
Oh
all of
yeah.
those takes.
Yeah.
The bloopers are awful. I've so much footage that just goes into the fire. You guys
Yep.
will never see the light of day,
Yep.
which
Same
has been
here.
so bad. But moving on from that, so this one is really funny. So I've asked this question in all interviews. In all interviews,
Mhm.
I start by saying one thing, and it's never one thing. It's always like a few things, in some case, like two or three. And I've just decided, you know what? That's fine. We can go to two or three because at this point, I'm convinced that someone from Sega is watching my videos because
Mhm.
there's no way bouncer changes happen the way they did without them hearing what we had to say. Like,
Right, of
I
course.
didn't write them in anywhere. I didn't post them in any like we just didn't. And Kai and I talked about some of these bouncer changes, and literally the changes we proposed word for word happened.
Yeah.
So we're
Make
convinced, like
Sure.
fully at this point. Like the fanatic change was something I said from the very beginning. It's literally Jupiter Tullus PA, Jupiter
Mhm.
Tullus potential, and the change with Blade Arts or with Blade Arts parry is exactly what Kai said.
Right.
Word for word, just make it so it resets whenever you do that. So it's just
Mhm.
it's funny for us to think about those sort of things. But regardless, all of that being said, to ask this question, if you could ask Sega for any reasonable changes, well, I'll say even both, reasonable or unreasonable, for your
Mhm.
class to just feel that much better, what would you ask for? If you could, maybe put them in order from like this is the most important to like this would be really nice to have.
Mhm.
If you were to ask for something for Ranger, if there's anything.
Okay. So my two main issues with the class lie with Blight and Launcher. That's my two issues.
Hmm.
Blight, first and foremost, it needs to be hit scan. Please, Sega. I cannot tell you the amount of times I have shot my Blight round and a boss moves and it was my last stock and now I have no Blight for 10 seconds and the entire party of Slayers is looking at me like I have five heads. Please change it.
I'm gonna cut in for
Um
like a half second. Um, I agree purely because it was. It has been hit scan before. It literally had a ring in base game that made it hit scan.
yeah,
So this problem existed. I don't know why they didn't bring it back over. It makes pure sense. So that is completely fair to ask. Go ahead and continue.
yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to
Um
mention that for people who hadn't played base game.
yeah, the hit scan blight is very big. I also think that the blight rounds cooldown should be changed. I don't think three stocks and then reset for 10 seconds is a good gameplay loop, if I'm being completely honest.
Mhm.
There are so many moments where myself and other top rangers will actively get punished because you can blight a boss when they're up, but then when they go down, the blight disappears on them. And if you don't have another stock ready for that down, then everyone's kind of just staring at the weak point saying, where's the blight round? I think that maybe something like if you were able to shoot one blight and then it automatically begins recharging, that would alleviate the problem, I
Oh,
think.
for sure.
Um, but like Pangolin, the scorpion bug thing in Kavaris,
Mhm.
you could shoot his weak point underneath his belly as Ranger, but then when his belly actually came up, the weak point wouldn't be there, and you would have to reblight. So moments like that, I think either let it transfer to downs, or make it so that the cooldown itself starts after you shoot the first stock, and you like can actively reload the stocks, or just introduce a reload system. One of the two. My third thing, well, sorry, I'm already on my third thing.
Like I
um,
said, it's fair.
yeah,
We've had full on conversations about these things, so I would love to hear these sort of stuff. So yeah, go for it.
yeah, but most of my issues really just reside with playgrounds. But I
Mhm.
think that while one can argue it'd be like a type of skill expression, like switching your blight from one part to another before it breaks, um, I really would just like either it not to reset on break, or if there could be like a break part meter, like slightly above the arm, that would be a ranger skill that I could just see to say, okay, I know I need to switch this because the bull is going to turn red if I don't switch this.
I
Small, but the amount of times it's happened is ridiculously high. And
I'm
launcher
in
should
favor
just
of more
be
information. I am
yeah.
because I feel like
I
it's definitely a situation for rangers where that's awful to have to deal with the whole blight situation. But I can't count
mhm,
how many times I've gone for something and then because something is about to break or it breaks in the middle of
yeah.
my attack, there's a flinch that happens. When
Mhm.
you say you have thrown launcher PAs into the abyss, I cannot count. Actually, my chat has now gotten into the way of just typing one about pinions. When Solus just flinches and his arms go up or something
Yep.
happens or whatever, and I just hit some dumb spot on him and it just does one damage, I want to just alt F4 immediately.
I've seen so
It
many
feels so
pinion
bad.
memes about that same thing where
It's-
it's like the pinion hitbox and then it's like where the actual pinion hits. And it's like in the most random obscure spot like on his back or something like
I
that.
have hit behind myself with opinion
Yeah.
on Solus. Like actively have hit behind me while I'm aiming in front of me at something. It hit whatever's behind me, and I'm like, you have got to be kidding.
Yeah, like there's so many moments, and honestly, I think that would be a good change for all classes because then people would know not to waste like their really big attacks, and then the
Hmm.
part breaks right as it happens.
For sure.
But other than that, I think launchers should just be able to stand alone as a usable weapon, or at least promote the usage of the weapon more. It's just very sluggish, and it's just a support weapon. That's all it is right now. It's a support weapon to rifle. The launcher doesn't really feel like it has its own identity within the class. Obviously, potential ranger rework soon. Not sure. So all of this could just literally go out the window when they if they announce it.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I do think as of right now, launcher is just purely a support weapon. And also, side note, if you didn't know, if you try to shoot a blight
Hmm.
from launcher or rifle and you get hit as the bullet is coming out, the bullet will just not come out and it won't hit anything. So that's why we need hit scan play. Like, please.
Yeah, that's that.
Very, very annoying. But
That
yeah.
is not a hard ask. I feel again, it's an issue that existed before, and they introduced a ring to fix it. Those guys I know
Hmm.
back in base PSO2, a lot of times there were individual skills that just certain classes needed or felt like they were very important. Things like homing on photon blades back in base PSO2 for bouncer. One of the ones that Ranger had was literally that it was hit scan blight,
Yeah.
where you would just blight would hit the spot that you're locked onto, and
Hmm.
I feel that is the bare minimum of an ask for
Yes.
Ranger, because quite literally we have things like Katana that have a hit scan counter. We have
Hmm.
Slayers that have hit scan abilities. We have hit scan is there. It's not like it's something that's unfair. So
Right.
that I feel like is the bare minimum of what you can ask for. So that, and
But
I
yeah,
feel like of all classes, launchers probably in either between launcher or Talus. Again, I haven't looked at the tech arts. Maybe Talus is much better. I don't know. We'll talk about that when we talk to tech. We talk to either Tectors or Forces or whatever it happens to be. But
hmm
if any two weapons are in the needs of a renewal, I feel like launcher is alongside of Talus in that situation. So
yeah. But aside from that, I mean, I don't really have any like crazy irrational asks. And most of the things that I would want change with the class are more so just quality of life things for
mhm.
every ranger. Um, but yeah, I mean that's all my changes really.
Yeah, again, I feel like that's totally reasonable. Yeah, those changes would be absolutely fantastic to see happen for Ranger, and I would love to see again just more information provided to the player overall. That whole idea of
Hmm.
a break part meter would be fantastic. I mean, think of how long we existed without having health bars over
Yeah,
certain
that's
enemies, and they
that's crazy.
eventually caved and provided health bars, and it's been fantastic
Hmm.
to see that bit of information provided to the player, so that way they understand how to utilize the resources they have. So
Yeah.
but yeah, that is awesome. That actually takes me to the close of what I wanted to talk about today. While wrapping things up, were there any sort of general shout outs you wanted to make? Any players, any pieces of media or anything along those lines? Keep in mind, guys, we're gonna leave links to everything in the video description across this entire video. It depends on how I decide to edit this, but you probably have seen clips and things like that play. So anyone's footage, anyone's content that's been in the video itself, you will likely see links to their information in the video description. But any that you wanted to personally go ahead and shout out, Kasumi, feel free.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'd love to shout out Ivu, so my other half as far as the Ranger guide is
Hmm.
concerned. Katia, Katie did YT. I would love to shout out her. She is phenomenal as a content creator, phenomenal as a person. Her gameplay is very good, very informative. And Addie, I would love to shout out those three specifically. And this isn't necessarily a shout out, but I'm going to use it as my in lieu of a shout out of my own channel. I cannot believe I have to say this, but if you are a ranger, please blight. Like, please. I'm telling you right now. Look, I understand Blaze Shot Craft 2 is viable now, but I need you to shoot your blight if you are ranger. Please.
We will all
That
love
is,
you more.
yes,
Rare drop will increase by like 3,000%. Um,
100%.
you will have everything you want in life. You will have all the successes. Just shoot blight. That's it. That's all that's been holding you back this entire time. No, but
Yep.
in all seriousness, we will be also including links to Kasumi's socials in the video description as well. I know in lieu of them not shouting themselves out, but the whole point of this video is to provide a platform for everyone to get to know a lot of these players because you guys may not know them. You guys may not see these sort of things, and a lot of times people ask, how do I get better at playing an individual class? And a lot of times it's, hey, dude, if you don't know what to do, either check out a guide or watch someone else play it and try to pick up on small things that they're doing, give it a shot, or see if you can find out a reason why they're doing certain things. So
Yep.
it's it's been a great thing for me personally, and I think it might be a huge help to anyone else out there who's trying to get better at the class or just wants to see some cool stuff. Sometimes it's just cool to look at top end gameplay, to see
Yeah.
what classes are capable of. So
Most
yeah, you can't get
definitely.
away without shouting yourself out. I'm gonna do it anyway. Uh,
I appreciate it. Obviously, thank you for hosting this. I'm sure myself and all the other creators really do appreciate this, like more than you know.
of
Thank you to the
course,
audience, obviously, for listening. I know we've talked about a lot of stuff. I know there was a lot of information. My socials obviously will be down in the description, so if you do want to reach me, you can reach me like via there or Discord, whichever you prefer, or in game because I'm on chip too. Um, but yeah, if you see me around, say hi. Thank you again, Chrono. Really do appreciate it.
of course, and this is like just a shout out on the side as well. I know you mentioned Katie. For those of you guys who don't know, Katie actually helped facilitate the meeting of a lot of these interviews. So that will probably be a name that you hear consistently in a lot of these because of their Discord and all the things that they're doing. So you'll probably hear their shout outs quite a bit. And they'll probably almost be in every video description moving forward. And I've had in some of them previously because without them, I wouldn't have the ability to talk to a lot of these players because I didn't know a lot of them. So this is the first time because you and I are actually talking. So super cool.
Thank you,
Again,
guys.
I appreciate taking the time out to meet with me. I have been all over the place with what's been going on IRL. So you've been super cool about just meeting with me in general and going
Of
through this.
course.
And it's been an absolute blast to sit
Like
down and talk.
likewise, it was awesome.
Awesome. Well, as you guys know, anyone who watches my channel, you guys know I'm super bad at outros, and I could ramble on forever, and I have to stop
Same.
myself before I do. But do all the YouTube things; it helps out a ton. Check out all the socials in the video description as well. Check out those individual players, and give them some love as well. Spread the love around the rest of the community. It's super awesome. Anyway, guys, take care, my friends.
Take care,
Peace out.
everyone. Later.